This is role-based security stinks, better authorization in ASP.NET. I am Benjamin Day, owner of Benjamin Day Consulting, based out of Brookline, Massachusetts, which is basically Boston. Anyone here from Massachusetts? 2? Okay, cool. Where are you guys from? New Hampshire does not count. That's like when people say, it's like, yeah, I'm going to Chicago. Where in Chicago? Milwaukee. All right, but I live on the public transportation, so I'm right in the city. Anyway, okay, yes, we are at least New Englanders. This is New England Talk with Ben Day. We're taking your calls this morning. All right, so my specialty is Visual Studio ALM, which means I specialize in Team Foundation Server. So Team Foundation Server, software development best practices, software testing, all that kind of fun stuff. Process, automated builds, yada, yada, yada. It's another way of saying I suggest what you and your team should do, you ignore me, and I send you a bill. I teach a lot of Scrum classes. I'm a certified Scrum trainer via scrum.org. How many of you have heard of scrum.org before? Okay. How many of you have heard of scrum.org because you saw my session yesterday? 1? Okay, cool. That's what I'm always kind of afraid that I'm going to say, who's heard of scrum.org? It's like, everybody. And it's like, who went to my talk yesterday? Everybody. Have you ever heard of scrum.org before then? Nope. So I teach a bunch of different classes on that, including how to scale your teams beyond just one team. That's Scaled Professional Scrum. If you're interested in any of that, give me a call or drop me a line. I'm benday@benday.com or @benday on Twitter. Feel free to heckle me as we go. Which actually sort of brings me to another thing. Like, I said that at a VS Live a number of years ago, and afterwards somebody came up and was like, dude, you would not believe what I wrote about you during that session. I'm like, that's weird. And I look, and it's like 52 things that are wildly inappropriate to say in public. I'm like, thanks, dude. Yeah, heckle, yes, but be ragingly offensive? I don't think so. Okay, if you've got a Pluralsight subscription, I've got a whole bunch of different Pluralsight stuff up there, Scrum skills, TFS skills, load testing skills. There is a DevOps class that is mostly written that will be coming soon, or my editor is going to kill me. So, moving on. So this talk, my goal is to help you to design and understand how to get a flexible authorization framework. So I want to make the distinction between authentication and authorization. So authentication is who are you, so username and password kind of stuff. That identifies you as the person using the application. The stuff that I think is more interesting is the authorization framework stuff. So authorization is, given you are already logged in, what are you allowed to do? Or if you're not logged in, what are you allowed to do? So when I build a security framework or when I work with a security framework, I want my constraints to be constraints to be configurable at runtime, which is a way of saying I don't want to hard code absolutely everything into my system, because then any change that I have to make to my security framework requires me to rebuild my system, which, not the worst thing in the world, but it's also not ideal, and you can sort of go into some bad places maintenance-wise. Other things that I want to think about is when I really get going with security, I might have one type of object, let's say person, and there might be view permissions on person and edit permissions on person. But then I might want to go a little bit further and say, okay, well, somebody can view person 1 through 20, and they can edit only 1 through 10. So thinking about what this looks like in the Windows file system, you right-click on a folder and you can give permissions on that, or you can right-click and give permissions directly on an individual file. And on those things, there are different permissions that are constant for all those types of objects. So read, write, change, delete. These are all the big things that you'd be able to do in the Windows file system. you've got those permissions, and they're defined in the abstract, and you can apply them to any folder or any file in the file system, and you're basically following the same pattern again and again and again. So you're reusing that design. Also, a goal is I want it to work with .NET security. This has gotten a lot easier over time, and I want something that's reasonably easy to administer. So let's think about role-based security. So security in ASP.NET has changed a lot in the last couple of years. So who's been working with ASP.NET from the very beginning? Yeah. Like, that's a long time, isn't it? Like, that was about, what, 2000, 2001 that really got going? So back in the beginning, we had just role-based security. So you had an iPrincipal object that represented what you could do, and there was one method on it, isInRole. And you pass it a role. Am I a member of HR? True or false? Am I a member of person editors? True or false? That's role-based security. So it's authorization based on what role your identity is part of. Based on iPrincipal, and that's in system.security.principal, and it's got that method on there called isInRole. You pass it the role name, it gives you the true or false. Now, there is stuff that you could do with Windows Principal and yada, yada, yada. But let's take a fictional HR application. Now, I know we're all in the ASP MVC world, but it's a little bit easier to read if I just say per page. So I'm going to use old school web forms for my page names here. So let's say that you've got 3 different roles: vice president, HR manager, and HR associate. And then there are various actions that you want to do. So vice president can hire employee, edit compensation, edit employee information, which means that if you're in that role, you should be able to access all these pages that are right here. HR manager, it gets limited, so you can't create employee, but you can edit compensation and edit employee information. And then HR associate, you can only do a limited amount. Does that make sense so far? And you can do that all with just isInRole. Now, let's say that your life starts getting a little bit more complicated. Let's say that you start buying companies. I've been doing some consulting for a company, and every time you turn around, they've acquired some new little startup, just like hoovering up everything. So back in the beginning, you just had one office, so hiring employees, editing compensation, editing employee information worked fine. It was good because everything's in one place. But as you start adding offices, maybe you want to start changing your permissions so that you can edit compensation for people that work in the Boston office versus editing compensation for people that work in the San Fran office. Edit employee for Boston, edit employee for San Fran. That starts to get a little bit more complicated, and that gets to the question of, well, how would you even implement that in isInRole? Probably what you'd have to do if you wanted to do it for isInRole is you'd have to introduce a bunch of different variations on what those roles are. So back here where we've got hire employee, edit compensation, edit employee info, you'd have to introduce hire employee Boston, hire employee San Francisco, edit compensation Boston, edit compensation San Francisco. That's going to require a code change, right? You can't just leave your isInRole checks that you put in your application. You now have to go through and change all those things out. And now you've got 2 checks instead of just 1 check. You with me so far? Okay. So that's getting to where the limits of isInRole starts to come through. So when you add more offices, that starts to get more complex. And then what if you need to start adding new roles? Let's say that you have HR Uber executive or something like that, and they can do certain other things. Now you're going to have to go through all the places in your code, change all that stuff up. Other things like that, the grouping of employees, like let's say that we can manage employees that work on the moon, but not employees that work on Mars. So creating arbitrary groupings and doing permissions on that, that starts to get really complicated. So role-based security limitations, it's all fun and games till someone loses an eye. It's all fun and games until you need context. So role is just a single string. Isn't role true, false? You don't have is enroll for this employee or is enroll for this office. So that just broad way of doing it, that is enroll, that super broad approach, and that lack of context goes to that limited configurability. So when I say limited configurability, I mean that we're going to have to go and change the code if we want to modify any of this stuff. It also becomes not particularly configurable at runtime because all of your security rules, okay, this person can do this, but not this, that has to get coded into your application and compiled down and deployed. Which brings me to claims-based security. How many of you are doing claims-based security right now? Just a couple. Okay. So this talk, I'm kind of thinking of it as getting you ready for claims-based security. So claims-based security, so let me back up. With ASP.NET Core coming, I am really confused about what we call the ASP.NET MVC version that we've been using forever. Does everyone agree that the stuff that is already released is ASP.NET MVC 4? Yes or no? Is it 5? It's 5? What is the right answer? 5? Okay. So if you see 4, I apologize. Okay. So in ASP.NET 5, you could do all this claims-based security stuff, but it's a little bit tucked away. It's a little bit hidden. It's a lot more role-based security. But when you get off into ASP.NET Core, so the stuff that's going to be released soon, that pretty much rewrite from the ground up of ASP.NET, that stuff is all claims-based. So you have to sort of start getting your head wrapped around this kind of stuff. So claims-based security is declarative security. So that role-based thing, remember I'm saying that all of your, you might have is enroll HR manager, and you might scatter that in 14 different places throughout your code base. Yeah, that's not really, an HR manager might be able to do edit and view on employees. That fact that that role now turns into 2 different permissions, edit and view, that's kind of hidden. That's tucked away in your code. It's not explicit. Claims-based security goes for a more what's known as declarative model, which says that if you've got that claim, you've got that thing. You have that permission. If you don't have that claim, you don't have that permission, which actually is kind of a really clean way to build your systems, because that turns around and gives you a bunch of name-value pairs. So system.security.claims namespace, this is where all that stuff is living. And it gives you your permissions and name-value pairs. So isEnroll only works on name. HasClaim, which is the check we'll be using in a bit, that has a check for do you have the claim type and the context for the claim, meaning the value. So now claims-based security lets you do that context stuff. So you can say, do I have permission to edit employee number 5? Yes or no. If I go look at my claims, if I have edit employee and then 5, then yes, I can do this. If I don't have that, goodbye, Irene. You're not going to get into that. Anyone have any questions so far? How am I doing? Wildly boring? It is 8 o'clock in the morning, so thank you all for getting up. Okay, so beyond that, like, who went to the bad thing and then went out partying after that? Yeah, okay, 2. All right. Welcome, semi-professional alcoholics, to our claims-based security session. Hopefully, your hangover is not too bad. Okay. So claims-based security, if you've got it, if you have the claim, you have the permission. If you don't have the claim, you don't have the permission. It also allows you to do some other stuff. So it goes beyond just permissions. It also can tell you things about people, like what's your birth date? So you could have a claim, which is birth date, and then the value would be whatever your birth date is. You could have some claim, which I'm going to do a little bit later. What is your awesomeness level on a scale of 1 to 10? You can put that in there too. That stuff is all available, and that gets available to you on the thread, and you can make checks against that. So I want to introduce the idea of rights-based security too. So this is what I'm thinking of as a software architecture. It's a way of building against claims. So this is the architecture we're going to use in the app that I'll do demos on. So what you're going to do gets broken into little tiny pieces that I'm going to call rights. So that would be a claim type. So edit employee, view employee, delete employee. Each of those is a right. Now, those rights will have context. So edit employee 1, delete employee 2, create employee 5. All those rights will have context so that when you go and do your checks about permission, you're going to check, okay, someone is asking me to edit employee number 5. Do they have the claim that says they can edit employee number 5? So now we're starting to get down to that low-level stuff. They're asking to edit, so I'm going to check to see if they have the edit permission, as opposed to they're asking to edit, so therefore I'm going to go check to see if they have the role for HR manager or the role for admin or the role for whatever. Okay? So this is getting to be much more explicit about what we're trying to get. So one way of thinking about this is all this rights-based security stuff could basically bring row-level permissions that you might have in a database up to the application level. So for any particular record in your database, if it's got an ID value on it, you could say, okay, do they have permission to edit that row? It's not literally that, but that's a way that you could wrap your head around it. So claims versus roles. So when you're doing those roles are, actually, let me back up. I'm still going to use roles in my application. They're really helpful for broad checks. Like, I might have 20 screens in my admin section, and for any of those screens, I might have very specific permissions that I need before someone can do anything on one of those screens. But rather than me going through and checking those like subset things, I probably will want to, for any admin type action, just say, do they have the role user administrator? And if they don't have that very basic role, just bail out. Just keeps it easy. So for sections of your app, like if you don't have a prayer of accessing the admin area of your application, then have a role that says admin, and then say is enroll admin. And if it's there, let them in and try to check some more stuff. So once you've gotten into that section of the application, then I would start looking at my rights/claims. So I'm going to start checking for whatever I'm trying to do at the operation that they're asking me to do they have that claim? Do they have that permission? So this gets you down to the lowest common denominator in permissions management, because it's really about what actions are you trying to perform on the objects you're trying to perform them on, as opposed to are you in some giant role. Now, if you start coding against those lowest common denominators, those really small pieces, that's going to give you a lot of flexibility to arrange stuff later on. So if your permissions model changes, how you grant people permissions, if that changes, you can always come back later on and rearrange that stuff. But the permissions that you're checking for, does this person, can you edit this person, number 5, that stuff gets coded into your application and that stays the same. So claims-based security to-dos. Identify what are the securable items. So what are the types of objects you want to secure? Books, person, library entries, admin section, stuff like that. For each of those securable items, define the actions that you can perform on that. Those will turn into your claims. And then also, if there are broad sections of your applications, determine what the roles are going to be. That turns in, broad sections of the applications, that turns into roles. Anyone have any questions on this stuff so far? All right. So hooking into .NET security. So you're going to use the system.security.principal namespace. That's going to use iIdentity to establish who you are. iPrincipal establishes what you can do. And these are going to be accessible through thread.principal, HTTP context.user, or just the user property that's available on controllers. Now, the nice thing about this is that your principal, your what you can do, gets set onto the thread, and that will follow you through all the tiers of your application. So you don't have to only do your permissions checking inside of your ASP MVC MVC layer. You can also do it at your data access layer or anyplace else. So the way that I think about this is that ASP MVC is going to be checking in order to avoid giving the opportunity to cause security exceptions. So if someone can't use the admin section, you shouldn't show them the admin link. You can check that through isEnroll when you're drawing the screen. For other tiers, you might make use of that iPrincipal to trim out data they're not allowed to see. So if they can't see person 1, 2, 3, or they can't edit person 4, 5, 6, just pull that out of the result and then don't return it. So filter out unauthorized records. All right. Now, one of the nice things that's happened with the changes in ASP.NET Security, back in the olden days, you had to write all this stuff yourself, and I designed really quite elaborate database structures to set this all up. Well, with the latest version of ASP.NET 5 and with Core, there's a security schema that comes out of the box. So if you create a new project, you just click the register button, everything works automatically, sets it all up for you. And it's got a bunch of different tables in it. So ASP.NET users, that's going to have your user account information. So that assumes that you're using local accounts. So you're going to define your usernames and passwords locally inside of your database. There's also a table called ASP.NET user logins. And this lets you map between your local information and any information that happens using social logins. So the social login providers that we get out of the box, Microsoft account, Facebook account, and Twitter account. This is really some of the more exciting stuff, because rather than you having to put that username and password stuff into your database, if you configure your application so that it's using one of those external identity providers, you don't have to store the username and password anymore. That becomes someone else's problem, right? Has anyone tried that out? Has anyone used any of these? A few? Okay. I'm going to do a demo later on with the Microsoft account. So one of the things that, yes?
By Microsoft account, like an Active Directory account?
Your Windows Live ID. Yeah. Is that disappointing?
Yes.
Why?
Because we don't allow like that type of stuff in my office. It has to be Active Directory.
Yeah, you can't use ASP.NET anymore. Never. You're using Cold Fusion? Whoa. That is what I started doing web development on back in 1997. Thank you for reminding me of just how old I'm getting. Yeah, so the social login stuff is different from the Windows authorization stuff. So if you want to use Active Directory to do this, there are guides online that'll let you do it. So all this stuff is pluggable and configurable. You can still do that. I'm not doing any demos on that one today, but it's out there. Just Google for it. It's just a matter of changing some configuration values, and it'll kick it over and use Active Directory for all this stuff. All right. So with those Microsoft account, which is your Live ID, your Facebook account or Twitter account, you're setting up this relationship between your local application and whatever that provider is. Now, one of the things that I think about with this is that if I have my own username and password store in my database, I really want to make sure I have an SSL certificate to secure the calls to login. Are we all on board with that? Because otherwise, your password is kind of clear texting, and that's what's known as not ideal. But if you're using these social logins, these external providers for authorization, they have all the username and password over there. You never store it in your database, so you don't really need an SSL certificate anymore because they've got one on their side. So when you click login and you go log in over at Microsoft's account, you type in your account, it pushes back this token. Hang on one second. This token that comes back, and that goes into your database right here as an ASP.NET user login. No password ever gets stored. Yes? But a token is basically your password?
So if you do that handshake with the external provider, the token you get back is still like the password that you use to have.
Yeah, don't wreck my story. Yes, you have a point. You would want that callback to happen. But if you're, okay, shoot me out of the sky and I'm just like spiraling down. Thank you very much for poking holes in my logic. Damn it. Yes, you have a point. So when you go and authorize yourself, you type in your username and password for Facebook or Twitter, it's going to make a callback into your system and it's going to send a token. That token basically says, here, if you have this token, you're cool. You're logged in. That token does not have your password in it. It basically says, here's your claims, here's what you can do, here's who you are. So you're not actually letting that password ever go across the wire. So it's not like you can go and hijack that and go, get into my Azure account because you saw me type in my Windows Live ID. Now, going to the next thing, you still have roles in this schema. So ASP.NET roles would be the list of roles that the application knows about. So administrator, basic user, whatever. You have a table called ASP.NET user roles. That'll map what roles are available to each user. And then we get into the good stuff. ASP.NET user claims. So if you want to start storing custom claims about people, this is where all your security stuff is going to go. So if someone can edit person 123, it's going to show up in this table right here. So claim type will be person 123. Claim type will be person.edit. Claim value will be 123. And you spell out all those things in this table. So when you log in, automatically the security system in ASP.NET will pull that out, populate what's known as your claims principal. So claims principal is what all this stuff uses under the surface to store what you can do. Remember I said iPrincipal is there in .NET, and that has an is in role? Well, claims principal implements iPrincipal. It is that type of object. So you can go through and start making these calls and making authorization checks about that. Now, where this starts to get interesting is these social providers can send claims in as well. So you can start making a combination between claims that come in externally and claims that happen in your local application. Now, if you want to start going and making modifications to this stuff, it's going to be, so if you create a brand new ASP.NET 5 project, it's going to generate a bunch of code for you. One of the things it's going to generate is an application user class. This extends identity user in claims. And if you want to start plugging in your own custom claims, when you're logging in, you're going to implement a little bit of code and generate user identity async. So this is going to be, if you're taking notes on anything, this is the place to go to start adding really, really custom stuff to your security authorization framework. All right, let's do some demos. Actually, any questions before I hop into demos? Yeah.
Kind of embarrassing question. Is this available in web forms as well?
Kind of embarrassing question, is this available in web forms as well? Yeah, it's all basically kind of working the same way. Wow, that is embarrassing. Should we laugh and point at him for doing web forms? I've been there, dude. Look, so I'm guessing you have a legacy application? Yep. Anyone else here work with legacy applications? Turn around, you're in good company. Anyone here still doing ASP.NET web forms? A lot of you. Anyone still doing ASP Classic? A couple, yeah. Not on purpose? Wait a minute, how do you do it not on purpose? Oh, okay. You know you could get another job, right? Anyone here from Delaware? Cool. All right, so I can talk about Delaware. So I was teaching a class a couple of years ago, and it was a Scrum class, and I'm trying to be inspirational, and like, you can change the world, yada, yada, yada. It doesn't have to be the way it is. You can, yay, do all kinds of things, change the culture at your company, whee. And they were just like, no, we can't change the culture of our company doesn't want to change. They're just so down in the dumps. And usually when I'm teaching, I say, well, you know, there's lots of jobs out there for .NET developers. So if your employer stinks and doesn't want to work in a way that makes sense, aka Scrum, you can vote with your feet. You don't have to stay. And I said this in the Delaware thing. And when I drove, you had to drive. Delaware's not big, but there was nothing nearby. And when I said, it's like, well, you don't have to stay at your employer. There are other jobs there. And they're like, no, we're literally the only .NET employer in all of Delaware. There are no other jobs. And I was like, I can see that. I can totally see that. That was, yeah. I say semi-ridiculous things in classes all the time. One of my favorite stupid things that I ever said is anyone here ever watched, what is that, Curb Your Enthusiasm? Larry David. Like, Larry David's always like saying things that are getting him in trouble. I'm kind of like the Larry David of tech. So I was teaching this class, and this dude was just coughing the whole morning, and he was just coughing and coughing, and it was not just like a little cough, it was a real, like, gross cough. And it's going on for hours, and at some point I was like, dude, are you okay? Sounds like you got lung cancer or something. And he said, well, I don't have it anymore, but treatment's going well. I was like, oh, somebody kill me. And my customer came up to me afterwards, like, okay, that wasn't cool, but we should have told you that Jack has lung cancer. I'm like, whoa. Yeah, okay. Where the hell were we? All right, so let's run my sample application. I am the guy that uses Edge. So if you look at your user agent logs on your web server and you see one person using Edge, that's me. So not a whole lot that's fancy right here. I've got a little bit of library management system. So let's say that you're passionate about cataloging various things. So I've got a handful of Pluralsight courses that are in here. So I've got a few of mine, a few of Deborah Carrada's, and I've got some other books. So if you want to come in here and click on details, you can see the details of the Wright Brothers book by David McCullough. The summary is planes. So this is meant to be like a card catalog system that you'd have in a library. Not a very good one, but the basic idea. So you can come in and you can edit stuff. Oops. Or you can't. Actually, that was my demo working right there. Okay. Let's go into library controller and let's comment out that code. Let's try that one more time. Wow, it gets really quiet when you're waiting for IIS to load up. Okay, so let's come in here. Let's go back to where I was. And let's click Edit on one of these things. There you go. Now it works. So you can go in and edit these things, create a new one, go back to the list, all that fun stuff. Now, additionally, we've got in the upper right-hand corner, you get this for free. You can click login. And I'm going to be jeff@test.org. Password is password. I usually use fake names when I'm writing sample code. And usually it's been something like Bodie McBoatface or something like that. And then recently I'm like, Jeff NyQuil or Clarence NyQuil. Like, just like the idea that Clarence NyQuil is the person that invented NyQuil just really tickled me. That's, yeah. And I told my wife, it's like, maybe we should name our kid Jeff NyQuil. She's like, no, we really shouldn't. And what the hell's wrong with you? Okay, so anyway, so I logged in as jeff@test.org. And I can still go and do this stuff, but now I've written a little page which is a summary page for security. So this is not something you would typically deploy on your application, but the idea here is that this is showing me all the claims that are available for my user account right now. So across the top, we've got issuer column. So that's a property on claim is issuer. Right now it's local authority. So local authority means that this is issued by us. Now, why is this interesting? Well, when you start getting into using Twitter, Facebook, Microsoft accounts, those external login providers, the issuer for the claim starts to become really interesting, because now this is how you disambiguate between two claims that are named about the same thing. So the authority in this case is us. That might be Twitter. It might be Facebook, might be Microsoft accounts. For the type, it's got this thing right here is our name identifier. Our value is a pretty ugly value. So if you're using the out-of-the-box ASP.NET security framework, your ID under the surface is a GUID. That's the GUID for my ID right now. My value type says it's a string, and then there's a whole bunch of information in subject type saying who am I? So a whole bunch of information. So jeff@test.org, information about what is happening in this. If we scroll down a little bit, I've got some other stuff that is defined. So in this case, I've got a role that I've specified. So claims role would be the claim type, and then the value is going to be library admin. So this is starting to say, okay, I'm an administrator in my library. Next one down, I'm a library user. And I can't scroll. And then we've got some other stuff a little bit further along, which is the claim would be library view, so view an item, and then scroll over a little bit. I've got the item ID for the thing I have permissions on. So this is starting to show us what we can actually do, because this is our set of claims. Someone's coming in behind me. Was that thunder a second ago? Fun. I'm flying out, like after I'm doing this talk, and then I'm doing the talk right after this, and then I have my suitcase right here, and I'm going to run to the airport. Yeah, good luck. I'm thinking, yeah, maybe I don't have to run. My plane is probably delayed. Thunder is a little bit different than what the last time was that I was speaking at VS Live Austin. So it was at this hotel, and I'm in the middle of my talk, and all the fire alarms go off, and everyone's split out the door. I'm like, all right, peace. So, good luck. Send me a good evaluation. Hope you enjoyed the talk. Bye. Fire. Ah. All right. So this is the set of claims that I've got. Let's hop down into the database. And here are let's look at the claims table right now. So ASP.NET user claims. So this is the list of permissions that were granted. And then over here in the database, we can start saying, okay, claim type view, library edit, and we're specifying permissions on those things. So when I was showing you that demo initially and it broke, well, this is what was going on with it. So let's go into our application code and let's start actually using some of these checks. No. How's that? What's that? This, we don't need the bottom bar. Can you view the code though? Are we okay? All right. So for the library entries, I've got a library entry controller. That's my class name. So that's the thing that when I click the link to edit a particular library entry, it's going to go to that controller, and it goes to this edit method and passes the ID. So I'm going to uncomment a little bit of code that's going to do my checks for authorization. So in this one, I've written a class called security utility. I'll dive into that in a second. And I've written a utility method on that called isAuthorize. So I say isAuthorize library.edit for that value that was being requested. If I don't have that permission, I'm just going to return HTTP not found. You probably could throw a security exception or something like that, but let's just stick with this one. Now let's dive into security utility. Okay, so I created a security utility object because this stuff gets a little tedious to work with over time. So on my security utility, I pass in the current identity, so the current logged in user, and I pass in the current user's principals. So the principal being the stuff they can do, identity is who are they. Now, since I want to be type safe, or since I need to be type safe and start accessing claims-based stuff, I'm passing those in as just the interface, and then inside of them, I'm going to do cast to the concrete type. So in this case, I cast this to claim identity. So down below, I still have my is and role. So if I want to say, is this person an Uber admin, just make a call against is and role, and it works. The more interesting stuff comes down here in is authorized. So is authorized, and you pass it the permission name, the ID of the thing you want to get permissions on, and then, well, line 39, if we were not able to successfully convert that identity over into a claims identity, just return false, because authorization is broken at this point. Then the next one, we're going to call into claims identity, and it has a method on it called hasClaim. Give it the permission name, give it the ID for what you want to do, and it returns true, false. Now, the guy in the back that broke my demo previously, you're thinking, we're not checking for issuer. Yeah, he's like, we're not. Okay, this is being simplified. So if we wanted to be really secure on this, if we thought that library.edit might come into us from Facebook as a claim, and then we have library.edit on our own, well, we're going to potentially have two different claims that look the same, but one of them is not the one we want. This is where issuer comes in. So issuer would say, okay, I only want to check the claims if the issuer is my application as opposed to Facebook. I don't care about Facebook's claims right now, I care about mine. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm just leaving it with that and ignoring the issuer. All right, so I do hasClaim, permission name, and then the ID. If it's got that, it returns true, else it returns false. So now when we come back over into our library entry controller in our edit method, we new up our security utility, and then we say is authorized for edit, ID. If it's false, we return not found, else we keep going. So let me run this. And if I hop down into my database for a second, I've given myself permissions to view and edit on item 17 and 18. So I'm logged in as jeff@test.org. Go to library. So 17 and 18 I should be able to edit. So let's click on edit. That works fine. 18, that works fine. 19, we get our exception. So let's go back in. Let's do a debug. So we'll put a breakpoint on the isAuthorize method. Hover over this. Is that going to stay zoomed in or not? Here we go. So that is the list of claims for the current user. So we got a bunch of information, like what's the name? The name is jeff@test.org. Identity provider is ASP.NET Identity. We are a member of the library admin role, library user role, and then we've got a bunch of other things down there, like library view, 17, 18, and then we've got library.bogus, the value. Yeah, question?
At this point, if you go into the database and add a new row, library view and 19, will it take, will it load it without restarting the application?
Load it without restarting the application, yes. Load it without logging out and logging back in? At the moment, no. The way it's configured, no. But you could change that around so that it's doing that for each request. It's not in this demo, but you could cancel that out. Yeah?
I don't know if you're going to get to this, but on your screen you're showing issuer, but there's no row, there's no column for them in tables, so where are you storing?
Really? Here, let's check that out. Hang on a second. Yeah, local authority. Magic. It gets automatically added somewhere in the login process. So local authority will always mean us.
So if it came from like OAuth, like Facebook, wherever, how does that?
If it came from Facebook, let's hold that thought. We'll get to that a little bit later on. If it comes from Facebook, it's going to say something Facebook-y. Yeah. That's a technical term, Facebook-y. Any other questions? Yeah.
So let's say I have my 50 of these, right, that I'm checking every time. What do you propose to put it in cookie, cache, how does it time out, or how often does it time? How often can I?
So you've got 50 various permissions. How do you handle that stuff? Well, it's going to, right now, the way it's configured, it goes into that auth cookie, I mean, the cookie that's written on your disk that has all that information in it. The timeout on that is configurable, just like your timeout is configurable for how long your session lasts. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, so I'm just thinking if I have to do it for every request to keep it fresh, like, if permissions change.
Yep.
How soon can I see that in action?
That's just a matter of changing the configuration on that. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what you do to change that pattern, but it's just a matter of, okay, well, every time that I come back, don't look at my claims that are in the cookie, just look at who I am. Just look at my identity cookie information as opposed to my permission stuff, and just reload it, refresh it as you go. Probably not a measurable slowdown, although if this starts to get really huge, where you've got trillions of items in here, that cookie is going to potentially start getting a little large. And that would be one of those reasons why you'd want to reload it from the database every time instead, is that database select is actually pretty straightforward. So select star from ASP.NET user claims, whoosh, that all gets built up, as opposed to passing it around in the cookie. Although if you're passing it in the cookie, you're making a performance trade-off someplace else. So the trade-off on that one is we have to push the cookie back up to the server, versus on the other one, if you're always reloading for the database, you incur the performance penalty of a database hit. So, I mean, actually, one of the things that I wanted to say was that you're going to have to load test this stuff up to see what makes sense. Generally, you're okay if you don't have tons and tons of data, but if you have lots and lots of permission data, you might want to figure out a different way to grant that. Yeah.
So on the cookie, you really want to make it as small as possible. You don't want like anything more than is required to build the other claims, really, because
Yeah.
there's a cap on how big the cookie can get.
Yep.
And two, once your HTTP request exceeds the size of the maximum transmission unit on your network,
Yep.
now you have a networking problem. You know, each request is going to be less performant than
Yeah.
than it otherwise was.
But how many of these things would you have to add before you really start seeing perf problems?
Well, it depends on all the other headers that are going on your
Right.
request, right?
Yep.
Authorization headers and
Yep.
bearer token headers and that kind of stuff. It doesn't. The MTU is typically about 1,400 bytes.
Okay.
It doesn't take a lot.
Yeah. This is why load testing is important. How many of you do load testing on a regular basis right now? It's like maybe 0.5% of the room. So not as much anymore, but I used to do a lot of load testing stuff. And one of the messages that I always had, and whenever I was doing talks or talking to customers, is you can't expect to get high performance out of your application if you don't plan for high performance. And one of the ways to plan for high performance is to do load testing against your application. Verifying stuff like MTUs, like he was talking about, or cookie size, passing the cookie being more performant or less performant than going into the database. So there's a lot of stuff you can do on that. Yeah? To seed the user claims? Yeah, actually, let's do that right now. You mean seed it as in when you create test data, automatically populate it? Yep. Okay, let's hop into that right now. So let's hit F5, continue. So I was authorized for that. That worked out great. Where am I? There's a lot of that going around. Was that Siri or Cortana? That was Cortana. Like, I think that Cortana basically has one method, and it's whatever that clip was. Sorry, I didn't get that. It just thread.sleep 10, thread.sleep 10,000, play that sound. Sorry, I didn't get that. Like the number of times, like I was all excited. Windows 10 came out and Cortana came out. I'm like, oh, I'm going to show my wife how awesome Windows 10 is because she's a Mac user. And I'm like, watch this. Hey, Cortana, what's the weather going to be today? Hey, Cortana, what's the weather? And it's just nothing forever. And then finally, Hey, Cortana worked. And it's like, then it was like 50, like 50, 42. Like, it just was answering exactly the wrong question at all times. I'm like, this is not working. Or like, but it's not like it's any better on iPhone. Like when I'm driving in the car, I'm like one of my favorite bands is the Yellow Jackets. And I'm like, play artist Yellow Jackets, and then it just like goes, calling your mother. No! The voice commands have a little way to go still. All right. Okay. Actually, I don't have a migration for this, but so how do you seed permissions into the database? Basically, the way that I would get into doing that would be the, what do they call it? Entity framework migration stuff. So in my old code, I'm going through, and actually for this one, I'm seeding the database data into that. So if I put these in and then I call the update database command from the package manager console, that'll update my database with the right database design and then also seed a bunch of data into it. So you'd need to find where the seed method is for the security authorization framework stuff and then plug that in. Other questions? How much time do I have left? 15 minutes? Okay. All right. So that is some of the stuff that I might be interested in doing right there. So another thing that we can do, let's try, where is my index? So let's go through and write a utility method that will trim out any records I don't have authorization for. So for my index is going to show me my list in a grid of all the library entries that I've got. So I'm going to introduce local. Oops. That is not how you spell entries, Ben. Looks like Brandeis. All right, so let's come in here. We'll say security utility. And because I'm lazy, I'm going to come back and cut and paste. Cutting and pasting really is the best way. Don't worry about duplicate code and good design. Just cut and paste everything. All right, so on this one, I'm going to come through, and now that I've got my list of library entries, let's do remove these. Or actually, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to do brute force. And that is the sound of me not getting home tonight until really late. It's going to be a couple hours? Okay. It's all day? Sweet. Yeah. Well, sort of. I wanted to know that. What's that? Well, actually, when you're saying there's a lot of bars around here, that's kind of cool. But I want to get to the airport first. I really want to get to DFW. Does anyone? So this is going to be me. Yeah.
I can take you to DFW.
Okay, that may actually do that. So at DFW, if you have the American Express Awesome Club card, they have a special bar there with free awesome drinks and free food. So you just go flash your card, and they're like, welcome on in. And so anyone heard of a bar called PDT in New York City? Yeah, woohoo! Like, drinking, wee! They have drinks from PDT there. So like this is like special cocktails. So I really just want to get there. So if I want to get stranded someplace, I want to get stranded at DFW, not at Austin. Austin's great. You don't have that bar. All right, moving on. I really should probably talk about this stuff instead of how much I want to go home and have a cocktail. Plus, it's 10 a.m. East Coast time, so it's okay. Yeah, question.
What you're about to type, how is that going to work if you're paging?
What?
The thing you're about to type, how is that going to work when you're paging? So I want to have the top, only the top 10 or the second page of like 1,000 records.
Yeah, don't worry about that. These aren't the droids you're looking for yet. Okay. Never mind. Yeah, moving on. Okay, so I'm going to do a for each over all the entries. Oh, that worked nicely. Let's rename this to be all entries. Okay, so for each of these things, I'm going to say, this is a little brute forcey. If utility is authorized library.view item ID equals false. So if I don't have permission on this, I'm going to add this into a collection which is going to be my remove these collection. Anyone have any idea why I'm doing it this way? I'm trying to avoid that iterator screwed up because collection was modified exception. All right. So let's see. All right, so for remove these, so all the things that I want to remove, I'm going to say all entries, remove item. Okay. So now when I draw this, since I'm typing on the fly, this will never work. Sweet. Oops. There's your problem. Thank you. That is like massively parallel pair programming. Well, and here's Billy Hollis's business card, so let's give him a call. All right, so let's log in as jeff@test.org. And let's go to library. There you go. So based on my permissions, I'm filtering the records that I'm even sending out. This is interesting and helpful to do when you're doing ASP.NET MVC stuff, where you're trying to draw an HTML interface. This is really, really important if you're doing WebAPI. So if you're doing WebAPI, you really don't want to send out a whole bunch of data down to the client, hoping that they will treat it nicely. So this trimming out what you don't have permission to actually access, that should get done before you push your result through your WebAPI endpoint. And at this point, I should be able to click Edit, and I can get into that, and everything's happy and wonderful. All right. Any questions on that? Yeah.
So for your claim value, does it have to be like an ID, or can you like validate against like say like a manager's name or?
Yeah, actually, so the ID value for the claim is actually a string. So what's that?
So you can pass any string then?
Yeah. So the claim type. So person's manager would be the claim type. And then the claim value could be Benjamin Day. Any other questions? Cool. All right, so that is what that looks like in ASP.NET, soon to be old school. Anyone want to look at this in ASP.NET Core? Cool. Anyone started playing with ASP.NET Core yet? A little bit? So in ASP.NET Core, and let's change the font size on this guy too. A lot of this stuff turns into policies. So in the previous code, we could have done checks for role at the controller level and said, okay, no one can access this controller at all if you're not in role admin. So it changes a little bit in ASP Core because it becomes policy-based claims authentication. So in this case, for our security controller, well, actually, let me run the app, show you what this looks like. All right, let's log in. Sweet. There we go. Okay, so let's look at this security tab, security page. So in this one, it's letting me in because I comply with the admin policy. And this is not the sexiest demo ever, but we've got a page. We've got a check to see what my awesomeness level is. Currently, my awesomeness level is an 8. Which means that I'm not awesome at all. But I am complying with admin policy, so that's kind of helpful. So this admin policy, any of these policies get defined inside of your startup.cs configure services method. And what you'll do is if you want to add these custom policies, you'll come in and you'll say, add policy, give it a policy name, and then you're going to do some things in here, passing in policy requirements. So the requirements now, this is basically the strategy pattern. So strategy design pattern is a design pattern for encapsulating an algorithm. And this is basically the awesomeness requirement or the admin role requirement is a strategy pattern for deciding whether or not you have met the logic that is required by that thing. Going down a little bit further, once you've got that awesomeness requirement specified, you also have to have handlers for any of those requirements, and you have to hook that into the dependency injection framework for ASP.NET Core. So for admin role requirement, I have admin role handler. For awesomeness requirement, I have awesomeness handler. So right here on my awesomeness requirement, I'm also saying that my minimum awesomeness has to be level 10. So let's dive into this. So awesomeness requirement implements Authorization requirement. And on my constructor, I send in what my minimum awesomeness is. And Authorization requirement is just a marker interface. So a marker interface doesn't have any implementation on it. It just says this is this type of thing. So we're marking this as an authorization requirement. Let's go to awesomeness handler. So what happens here is when the call comes in to check something, woohoo, thank you, it gets past the authorization context and the awesomeness requirement definition itself. And this starts to look at the user's claims. So in this case, if the user doesn't have a claim called awesomeness, just bail out. Next thing we want to do, if it does have that, we're going to grab the first instance of awesomeness and get the value. And if the awesomeness value is greater than or equal to the minimum level of awesomeness, we're going to say that this succeeded. So let's come in here and where is my view? So let's turn on my awesomeness policy. So this admin policy here says that I have to be a member of the admin role, and then the awesomeness policy means that I have to have at least a certain level of awesomeness. So let's run this. Access denied. OK. That means that I'm not awesome enough, I guess. Let's come into my database. And that's because my awesomeness is set to 8. Let's turn it up to 11. OK. Also, one of the other claims that I have is fluffy. True or false? I'm definitely feeling a little fluffy lately. OK, so that's enabled. Let's come back over here, and I'm going to log off and log back in again. That'll reload my claims. Go to security, and now I'm in because I'm awesome. There you go. So, oh my God, you're awesome. Awesomeness level 11. So what's happening when that actually runs? Let's put a breakpoint. Let's go to awesomeness handler. Anyone ever heard of that song by Spose called I'm Awesome? Oh, do yourself a favor. Like, not right this second, but make a note. Go Google, go on YouTube and look for Spose I'm Awesome. It's the funniest frickin' song ever. And my brother plays in the band that sometimes backs that guy up. So anyway, At one point, he says, "I'm only about as sexy as John McCain." So that's right there. Like, you know it's a good song. All right, let's come back over here. Let's go reload this. So we come in here and we check, yep, we have the claim for awesomeness, so we've got at least the basic check. Then we get the actual awesomeness value out. My awesomeness value is, come on, not working. Cool. But I met minimum level of awesomeness, and since I met that requirement, I can do context.succeed, and that says that this requirement passed, so I've met this. One of the demos that they do on the ASP.NET Core website for this stuff is verifying that you are at least 21 years old. So you can have an age claim, says what your current claim is, excuse me, says what your birth date is, and then in this you can do calculations to figure out, based on your birth date, how old are you? Are you at least 21? If you are, succeed. If you're not, fail it. All right. And the fun stuff on this is that it's all much more configurable now inside of ASP.NET Core. So we have an authorize that says the policy that's in there, and then inside of your startup.cs, that's where you hook up to your custom handlers and all that stuff. All right. Any questions? Yeah.
The order of the policy matters, right? How you have those under control.
The order of the policy matters.
You switch those.
So if you're awesome but not an admin, would it let you in?
Right.
I haven't tried that out. Should we? I don't think I have time to do that demo, but that would be a good demo to check. I've never tried that, and I'm going to try that as soon as I'm waiting for my plane to take off. Yes?
So I assume you have to have some type of administration application to manage all this permission and everything.
Yeah. Were you going somewhere with that? Okay. Yeah, it's fairly straightforward to write. It's just because it's all entity framework under the surface, so you can just go through and create some screens on the top of that that make specific sense to your application. Guy who ruins my points. Go.
This entire policy thing is an addition, right? So all the code that you've already written still works?
In ASP.NET Core, I actually have not tried that out. The model for how you do all this stuff looks completely different. If you are authorizing directly against the claims collection, that probably works just fine. But for this, since policy is so completely new, I'd probably go for policy-based stuff if you can.
I got another one.
Okay?
So, ASP.NET Core now, but their GitHub page, or at least the current stable release is like 2.
Okay.
And I think they were working on 3.0, and I think they rebranded it now to 1.0. If that will be different unit packages, or if they...
Oh, yes, actually. So I don't know for a fact, but I know that for enabling Microsoft account authorization, the NuGet package names have changed entirely from pre-release to... It doesn't change names. It changes version number and whether or not it's flagged for pre-release. At present, a lot of things are flagged for pre-release. But hang on one second. Let me wrap up. So I wanted to show you how to get Microsoft account authorization, so that external provider working inside of this. I ran out of time. But I do have a walkthrough on this that walks you through in excruciating detail how to get it going. I'm also going to publish all my sample code up on my blog, probably while I'm waiting for my plane. So, and on that note, I think I'm out of time. So let's get to this thing right here. Thank you very much, and feel free to contact me if you have questions, and that's